When I started Tanglewood 22 and a half years ago, a little more now, the plan was always to move to Costa Rica. I decided Costa Rica was the place before I'd ever been here, because Costa Rica was, first of all, as much as I love islands, islands have hurricanes.
Yeah.
And it's not just that. Everything's expensive because so much has to be shipped in. You know, I thought it probably would make more sense to be in one of the countries in Central America because it's close to the US, where I had most of my clientele at the time, and because things are much less expensive here. Islands tend to be expensive. Real estate's limited. You know, here we can have a beautiful place. Didn't cost an arm and a leg to get here. And so, and Costa Rica, of course, was always in many ways ahead of the other countries, more conscious. I don't know if has anyone here traveled extensively in Latin America? Because in many countries in Central America, for instance, everyone tosses their garbage out the window. You see the same thing in Asia, Thailand, garbage everywhere. You don't see that here. The consciousness is different. People just don't do it. In most of the other countries I've been to a lot of the countries here, you see it everywhere, not here. I mentioned that here, all of our energy is renewable energy, that they closed all the zoos. That, you know, there's a lot, in a lot of ways, they're sort of forward thinking. There's no army here. I like that. I came to Costa Rica probably 7 or 8 times looking for a site, and I negotiated 2, thought I had a deal. In both cases they were with Americans, and I came back to sign a contract and they said, oh, sorry, we sold to someone else, get more money. And I got discouraged, and a friend said, why don't you look at Panama? And so I went to Panama to take a look. And in fact, before I went, I looked online, and I thought, what I wanted was to create a community, right? I needed a lot of land. But what I needed was a place I could move to and operate from, because I didn't have a bunch of cash to tide me over for a long period of time. I needed to be operating. And so I thought if I could find like a little hotel or a bed and breakfast that's already set up to take a bunch of people, I could work from there while creating the longer term place. And I looked online and I found a place up in the mountains. It was a place that had maybe 7 or 8 rooms, and I thought this could work, at least as a start. This would be a good location. And I wrote to them and I said, hoping that they would understand English, because I didn't speak Spanish, and I said, I'm looking for a place like yours. Do you know of anybody who would be willing to rent their place for a while? And that seemed to make more sense than buying, since it wasn't going to be a permanent home. And they said, yeah, we are. We're interested in renting. So I said, great. And we negotiated a deal online, and we agreed that I would fly down there to sign a contract, which they would have drawn up. I landed in Panama City, rented a car, drove out to them the next morning, and I get there, and they said, well, we've been thinking about it, and we had originally agreed to a 3-year term. I was going to rent it. Now, you know, I was going to have to make some changes to any place, pretty much, that I went to make it suitable for fasting. And they said, we've been thinking about it, and we've decided we don't want to. They didn't have a contractor on it. They hadn't done anything. They hadn't been to a lawyer. But they said, we don't want to rent it for 3 years. I said, well, how long are you willing to rent it for? 1 year. And I'm thinking, crap, by the time I get this place ready to go, I'm going to have to move out. But we had already announced that we were closing in the US, and that we'd be opening in Central America on a specific date. And so I said, okay, thinking, you know, I'll do what I can. I'll find another place as soon as possible. And so I contacted some realtors, and I went to look at some property on that trip. And I told this guy, I'm looking both for a short-term place as well as a long-term home. And I said, I'm looking for a large site, at least 100 acres, preferably more. And he takes me to a place, and he didn't tell me, he just drives me, again, he didn't speak much English, we didn't communicate very well, but he takes me to this place, an hour and a half out of the city, hour and 20 minutes. It's a building. It was designed as a retirement home for nurses. So it was all on one floor. It's a U-shaped building. There's 7 guest rooms over here. There's on the other side, there's a couple rooms over here, 2 rooms and a bathroom. Actually, there was 2 rooms and a bathroom, and then a room over here with the bathroom. And then there were some big rooms. I mean, it could have been used for the center, but it was on 5 acres. Like, this isn't gonna work for a community. And the place was in terrible condition. It had been sitting vacant, it turns out, for 7 years, deteriorating. And it wasn't well built to begin with. In fact, until I saw this place, it was probably the ugliest place I'd ever seen. And I said, yeah, this isn't gonna work. And in fact, I couldn't actually see inside the building. There was one room, all the rooms, there were 7 guest rooms, a room we used, eventually, we moved there, I'll tell you ahead of the story, but we wound up going there, but 1, 2, 3, 4, there was maybe the rooms I mentioned plus 5 more rooms and some public bathrooms. But only one, the smallest room, the door was open. All the rest, the doors were locked and there were curtains, and we couldn't get in. So I couldn't actually see inside any of the rooms, except for this one, which was, didn't tell us much. So I looked at some other things, went away with an agreement with the owners of the B&B that they would draw up a contract and I'd come back in a month. And I come back in a month and they say, we don't have a contract and we've decided that we're gonna need twice as much money. This, by the way, is a pretty common tactic here. That's what people do. You know, they've got you, right? I mean, so, I'm furious, and I'm thinking, screw you. And the first thing I did was I called the realtor, and I said, organize a meeting tomorrow morning, if possible, with the president of the Nurses Association that owns the building, and her lawyer, and a translator, someone who speaks English, because none of them did. And we met the next morning, and we negotiated a deal. And the deal was dependent on me seeing inside the building. So they gave me the keys and I drove up there that afternoon and looked at the place and wound up signing a deal with them. The deal was I leased it for I forget how many years with the option to buy it. And it was actually a really good deal. I mean, they wanted to get rid of it. They built this thing, and they had nothing invested in it, by the way. They went to a wealthy landowner, a cattleman who had thousands of acres, and he gave them he gave them 1 hectare, which is 2.5 acres to build on, gave it to them. And someone had connections with the guy, and then they went back to him and said, can we have another one? And he said, no, but I'll sell it to you. Well, someone had connections with the federal government. And so the government put up the money to buy the hectare of land, which wasn't much, and to build the building. And the association had nothing invested. And they built this building, and they didn't have enough money to open the doors, to operate. Right? So it sat there vacant. And they kept trying to sell it, and people rented it for a little while, and nothing worked. Everyone left. And so they agreed to take every penny of rent and apply it to the purchase price, which is like a 0% loan. Right? Every penny I paid in rent came off the price that I owed them, which to me, I'm a finance guy, meant I want to buy this as late as possible. I want this free rent as long as I can have it. Okay, 0% loan. So at the very end, my plan was to pay it off at the end. And when I left, I had the place in the U.S. Have you guys seen the picture up here in the bookcase? No. Of the last place in the U.S.? Let's see if I can reach there without unplugging. Because it's face down. Oh. So this was our last place in the U.S. And it was about 5,000 square feet, about 500 meters on 3 levels on a mountain on 7.5 hectares, 17 acres on top of a mountain. It was pretty nice. We couldn't see another building from here. This is in Maryland, western Maryland, about an hour and a half outside of Washington, D.C. You can pass it around if you like. This place was on the market at the time, we made the move for $1.2 million, and I thought I had $400,000 or $500,000 of equity in it. I mean, I had about a $750,000 loan on it, right, that I had to pay off. And so the plan was to sell that place, have the building in Panama on 5 acres was $175,000. So I thought, I'm in good shape. I'll sell this building, I'll pay off the loan, I'll still have, $300,000 to do what I want, to look for a big piece of land to build a community. Well, long story short, the market dropped, fell. I mean, the previous place we were in was just outside of Washington, D.C. It was a considerably smaller building than that. This place we had space for, let me think, 17, 18 guests, plus an apartment for a practitioner, plus we had little tiny rooms for 4 volunteers. And then I built myself a cottage, and there was another outbuilding I converted to a cottage for 2 other employees. And we were housing like 25 people on site. And in the year, that year, there were 3 properties in the county that sold this place, that sold for $1 million or more. 3 in the county. The neighborhood we were in, before that, there were 50 sales in the neighborhood for $1 million or more the previous year. So we went to this place, couldn't sell it. The market dropped. And the realtor said, finally, we can sell it for about $700,000, a lot less. I said, well, that's less than my mortgage. They said, yeah. So I gave it to the bank. And you can have it. But I thought I had this equity and didn't have it. So as we approached the end of, and during the lease period, I mean, the whole time, I'm thinking, we'll sell this place. The first couple of years will be fine. We've got all this equity. I was investing everything in the property, just like I've done here. Again, I'd love to find pictures of this place to show you how ugly this place was 6 years ago. But I had invested everything and turned it into a masterpiece, a magnificent place. And so when it came time to sign the purchase contract, I mean, as we're getting close, I remember one day the president of the association stopped by and she said, are you going to buy this place? I said, well, look around. I mean, I've invested, hundreds of thousands of dollars here. That's the plan. I said, now, it turns out I don't have the cash I thought I had. She said, well, we'll give you 6 more months. We'll extend your contract by 6 months. And I asked them to get it to me in writing. She said they would. Every month there was excuses why the board couldn't meet. And a month before the contract expired, she said, they sent a letter to my lawyer saying, we're not extending the contract. He's got 30 days to pay in full or move out. And I didn't have any money. So I sent a letter to our client list, several thousand clients at that point, our email list, and said I need to raise, I still needed about $175,000. We paid off $30-some thousand on it, $35,000 or $40,000, but we had expenses, closing costs, etc. So I need $175,000 quickly, in 2 weeks, and I raised it. People sent me checks. A couple of people made loans. Most people said, here's a gift, here's $1,000, whatever. I mean, I heard from people that said I hadn't heard from in 10 years that said, you saved my life. I'm glad to give you $1,000. In the end, the sellers refused to sign the sales contract. And it turns out they'd had the place appraised, and it was worth almost $1 million more than I owed them because of the work we'd done. We just like here, we built new stuff, we'd renovated everything, we'd landscaped. There were 7 fountains, water, the place was spectacular. And they refused to sign the contract because they didn't want to lose that money. Remember, they had nothing, they had not a nickel invested in the place. And they refused to sign the contract. So we sued them to get them to perform on the contract. And I went to several lawyers, and they all said, should be easy, open and shut case. You have a valid contract that says they have to sell it to you at this price within this amount of time. It's easy. except for one thing. This is Panama. And I don't know if this is still true, but 8 years ago, you could still buy a judge in Panama. I don't know if you can anymore. They bribed the judge and my lawyers, and the judge ruled in their favor. They didn't have to sell it. And then when you're in a dispute like this, there's no rent due. We didn't have to pay the rent because it should have been ours, right? So, in fact, they were going to owe us damages if we'd won, but they bribed the judge and won. And so now I owed them rent for those years we'd been in litigation, which I didn't have. I wasn't banking it because we were going to win. And I didn't know we'd lost. They didn't tell me. They paid off my lawyers. So they had to publish in a newspaper, but I don't read the newspapers. They have to publish it in the newspaper that this has happened. I never saw it. So I was actually in Toronto on a lecture tour, about to leave for a venue in Toronto, Canada, when I got an email from my assistant back in the office saying, the police are here with the judge and they're evicting us. I'm like, well, how can they evict us? There's been no decision. Well, they'd taken the decision 6 months before, and they waited for the statute of appeals to expire, which meant we had no legal right to appeal the decision at that point. So here I am on a lecture tour. I've got another couple weeks. I've got people showing up in 6 weeks, and I don't have a center. I don't have a place. And because we hadn't paid rent over those years, they seized everything I owned to pay the rent.
In the U.S.?
Panama.
You got robbed.
That's true. Yeah, lawyers do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So I came back. They let me have my clothes. I came back. I landed late and took a taxi to the place. My staff told these people they didn't have the keys to my apartment, which wasn't the truth, but they didn't want to let them in. So I came back, arrived around midnight. I hired a guy with a pickup truck to meet me there, actually to pick me up and take me there. And because I figured I'll take my clothes and whatever else I can. I mean, I couldn't take furniture, anything else. The first thing I did was I thought I've got to find a place. So it's probably different now, perhaps, but at the time there weren't a lot of retreat centers in Panama. Panama didn't have very much tourism. Most of the tourism was in Bocas del Toro, which is on the Caribbean, just the other side of the Costa Rican border, a long way away, and it's all partiers. It's all drinking and drugs and that sort of scene. There weren't a lot of places like in Costa Rica. There's a yoga retreat. There's probably like 100 of these places. In Panama, I didn't know of a single one, and so I contacted some people I knew in Costa Rica and said I need a place. And fortunately, it happened to be the rainiest time of the year, and they didn't have anything on their books, so they had the space for me to rent for one session. And that was my plan, was to come back to Panama, get my stuff, and then come to Costa Rica to be there in time to meet these people, these clients. And so they had paid the people living across the street to watch the place. And I was there for several hours. I went through all my stuff. I packed up what I could, my clothes, books, CDs, not much else. I mean, I had a beautiful stereo system. It was just too much to take everything. I left everything else. And as I'm driving away, the police show up, pull us over. These people had called to say that I was taking the stuff and was only supposed to take my clothes, which is true. They wound up letting me take it all. But I lost everything else I owned. And I wound up, I could only take 2 suitcases in the bus, so I got a storage unit and put most of my clothes in storage. And I got on a bus a few days later to come to Costa Rica with 2 suitcases and $200. I'd lost everything else. And I started over. And that was 8 years ago, this month, that happened in September. And so, there are detractors out there that say that I had to run, I had to leave Panama because I was in trouble. there was a client who, a guy who fasted with us, he completed his process. He left one day early, and he went to a hotel to catch his flight the next day, and he apparently fell down the marble stairs in the hotel, cracked his head on the marble, and his wife, when they contacted her, refused to let them give him blood. He lost a lot of blood, but they were Jehovah's Witnesses and they don't get blood transfusions. And so he died. And there are people that say it's my fault. The guy completed his process and left us. In any case, people say that I fled Panama. I didn't flee Panama. I'm legally a Panamanian resident, and I'm there on average probably once or twice a year, no problem. I mean, I come in and out of the country legally, I'm perfectly fine. But that's what happened. That's why I left Panama. Now, remember, I started out wanting to be in Costa Rica. And Panama is beautiful. We were at the same elevation we are here. The climate's very similar. The topography is pretty similar. It's a similar, it's the neighbor, it's a similar place.
Did you have water?
The biggest difference, we didn't have spring water on site. The biggest difference between here and there were the people. They're wonderful Panamanian people. But my experience of living in Panama for 6.5 years is that Panamanians in general aren't very happy. And Costa Ricans have been named the happiest people on the planet many times by whoever does that. Call it, these are these people. It's usually the Costa Ricans or the Danes are the happiest people. And you can see that here. I mean, our staff is, like my staff in Panama, they worked because they wanted to eat. But they weren't interested in their work. They were working because they needed to, okay? My staff here, most of them, they take pride in their work.
They're lovely.
They're beautiful people. They love to help. They're amazing people.
Yeah.
And when just to give you a sense of it, in Panama, and I said to the housekeepers I hired, okay, this is how I want the bed made, right? This is how the room should be set up. And I had to keep showing them. And I hired a friend, a Panamanian, who worked for one of the big resorts earlier, and his job was training the staff. And so I hired him to come in, and every session, every break, we had back then we had 4 9-week sessions per year with 4-week breaks between them. When we were closed for 4 weeks, he would come in every break and teach the same women how to make the bed and how to set the table. And some of these women went through this training 18 times and still couldn't get it right. And I'm like, how hard can it be, right? Came here, hired the first couple of people, showed them. They pretty much got it the first time. And I don't think Costa Ricans are way smarter than Panamanians. I think the people that we had working for us didn't really care. They weren't interested. They didn't do it right because it didn't matter to them how it was done, right? So I'm really, really glad to be here. And there's an important lesson here. In fact, at first, I didn't know what to say. It's weird. I don't know if you've ever experienced, I'm sure everyone's experienced difficult things, but sometimes there's a mix of emotions that logically make no sense. I felt ashamed that I'd lost the place. I'd screwed up. And I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted, right? There were things like that, but I didn't do anything wrong otherwise. And yet here I was, I'd lost the place and I didn't know what to tell people. So I didn't announce it to the world. And when clients would contact me and say, I want to come fast, I would say, okay, and we're not in Panama anymore. What do you mean? And I would tell them the story, and they're like, people kept saying things like, it's amazing, how do you get up and keep going? And I thought, well, what's the alternative? I'm going to lay on the floor and cry the rest of my life? I mean, at some point, it's a difficult thing, but you've got to pick yourself up and shake yourself off and say, okay, what do I do now? A lot of people suffer huge setbacks in life, and some people allow those things to prevent them from ever achieving anything useful. And I refuse to do that. I hope you will too. It's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how many times you get back up. Okay? Most of the most successful people on the planet have lost everything multiple times. I've now lost everything twice. I'm in good company. Maybe that's a good thing. It's, so what? So what? I can start over, okay? They could take my place, right? They could take everything I had, but they couldn't take my knowledge and experience and my contacts. And that's where the value is. The stuff, it's expendable. I mean, how many people in the Bahamas right now have just lost everything?
Most of them.
Most of them, okay? I don't, I mean, if the insurance companies come through for everybody, it's probably gonna take a long time. And people are facing like the loss of everything they have. In many ways, they have to start over.
We had Andrew in Florida, and she lost her house.
Okay? End of the world? No. You're okay, right? I mean, I had my health, I had my sanity, well, whatever it was left at that point. There's things they can't take away from you, okay? The important things, they can't take away from you unless you let them. And when I say they, I mean life. It doesn't matter if it's, if it's like this where someone robbed me, or if it's, you had a really negative health consequence. It doesn't matter. I mean, you're still here. And we're all gonna go at some point. As long as we're here, it's up to you what you do with your circumstances. It's completely up to you. And I thought, well, this is what I believe I'm called to do. And so I'm gonna get up and figure out how to do it again. And I'll tell you, this place I was renting, the people were, they were generous in that, I mean, they didn't have a lot of other people that wanted to be there in the rainiest time of the year there. It's pretty wet there. But I gave them a little bit of money. I said, this is what's happened. I don't have much money. I can give you a little bit of money right now, and I'm gonna have to, pay the rest over time. They're like, that's okay. I had clients coming in that were gonna pay. So it was about a week or two after I got there. One morning, I'm sitting there in the common area looking at the local real estate ads in the newspaper. And the owner comes in and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for my next place. And he starts laughing. He says, how are you gonna get a place? You don't have anything. You're broke. You've lost everything you have. I said, I don't know, but I am. Okay? I knew there'd always be a way, right? And here we are. We've been here 6.5 years. We started out with nothing here. I mean, when I feel kind of bad for the people that were here the first session because the place was ugly. And it was almost empty. Like we're in this big space. We had this set of furniture and these two chairs, and over there I had that set of furniture, which has the blue and green. They had different covers on it at the time, but that was all we had in here. And then when they were like this table, this was a restaurant. So this table and these tables in the corners, they were here. We had some of those, but that was all. We had the picnic table over there. That was here too. That was here when we got here.
How many rooms?
Say again?
How many rooms?
There were 5 rooms here, which each had enough space for 1 bed. In the first session, we had 5 people. That's all we had space for. And then when we closed, we took that first building here with rooms 1 through 4, this green building out here. We took the roof off it. We gutted the building, took all the bathrooms out. Because your bathrooms, who's in rooms 1 through 4? More than 3 of you, I think. But anyway, the bathroom was in your bedroom. So take the bedroom space, the bathroom was in there. Those rooms were tiny. The ceiling was so I could easily touch it, the ceiling. And there was 1 window in the back of the building. And the front was just a door. Completely rebuilt that building, added more than 2 meters to the center to the ceiling height, added a window, took the bathrooms out of the space, added closets, completely rebuilt it, totally. And we went from 5 up to, what, 13? No, I take that back. 5, we had 8, 9. We went from 5 to 9. And then we expanded room 5 to accommodate a second bed and went to 10. And then the next time we closed, we added room 6 and went to 12. And then we added rooms 7 and 8, which is why they're in the order they're in. The villas over there. And we went from 10 to 14. And then we did this, room 9, because this wasn't a guest room. There was no bathroom here. This was a bar right here. we turned this into a room and took space from the 2 public bathrooms to create the bathroom here. And then we added rooms 10, 11, 12. No, hang on. We added rooms 10, I think we added room 10, and then we added 11, 12, and 13 all at the same time. That's what happened. Meanwhile, renovating everything else, you know, rebuilding the pool, rebuilding that building, building the yoga studio, building the tower where the laundry room is, building housing for volunteers over there, building bathrooms for campers, planting thousands, tens of thousands of ornamental plants, because there was no landscaping here. Around these buildings was just gravel. There was nothing planted. I mean, there was the mango tree there was palm trees around the pool, there was this big tree out here. That was it. Around the buildings, it was just gravel. Everything else you see, we put in. We've done a lot of work in 6.5 years. Yeah.
Especially the first stint, like after in the first break you had, what finances did you use to do, like to gutter all these buildings?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I'll tell you the truth, what happened, you know, the contractors here, I mean, we used a local guy. The guy that did the work, you know, he's just a local contractor that's used to getting paid by the week, right? So, and they don't, you know, in the US, most countries, I'm sure, you hire a contractor to build something, there's a contract price, and they want a third up front, you know, and a third at a certain stage, and a third. Here, they want to get paid for their labor at the end of the week. And the materials, you buy that. So I figured I'm gonna somehow scrape it together and figure out how to pay him at the end of the week. I mean, the first couple of years I was here, every 5 or 6 weeks or so, 10 weeks, I would say to the staff, hey guys, I'm really sorry. I can't pay you your full salaries today. I'll get the rest to you within the next week. Because we were scrambling to pay the bills. And they understood, I mean, as I think you've heard me say before, we're the largest employer in the district now. There's not much work here. So they were very grateful to have work. The alternative was to not do anything, right? And they trusted me, and they always got paid. No one ever got screwed. Everyone got everything they had coming as quickly as possible. And it was sometimes the contractor was the same thing. I'd say to the contractor, look, I'm sorry, you know, I've only got this much. I'll have more coming soon. And it always came in fast enough that everybody was okay. With the materials, fortunately, you know, I feel bad about this a little bit, but being a gringo, we've got big advantages here because the material suppliers, it's the hardware stores here sell cement and block and gravel and all that stuff. They do, you know, they sell the hammers and they also sell those materials. And then we buy the wood from somebody else. And the wood at the time, I was buying from a neighbor of mine. He got out of the business, and I started buying from someone else. But the material suppliers looked at me and said, you know, American, you've got lots of money. You know, I said, can we have credit? And they said, okay. So they let me make payments. We couldn't have done it otherwise. Most of the work I mean, honestly, I have a lot less hair than I had 6.5 years ago. And part of the reason why is because it's been a little stressful. I mean, what you see now is completely different than what was here 6.5 years ago. And it's gotten this way because I've taken on the commitment to doing something without having any idea how I was going to pay for it. Over and over again. We've been in that situation where I said, okay, I mean, I've got 8 weeks. If I'm going to get this done, we have to start now. I can't wait till I have the money. We have to start now. And so I'm like, every week I'm going, how am I going to pay the bills? There's a lot of sleepless nights worrying about that. But it all, you know, eventually it all happened. It all came together.